The importance of purpose in assessing the deductibility of expenditure for corporate tax purposes. When calculating taxable income for corporate tax purposes, it is crucial to understand the purpose behind the expenditure that a business incurs. The core principle for determining whether an expenditure can be deducted from accounting income to reduce the taxable income is that the expenditure must be incurred wholly and exclusively for the purposes of the taxable person's business. In other words, the full amount of the expenditure should be directly related to the operation of the business and necessary for its generation of income. If the expenditure is incurred for non-business purposes, it does not qualify for a deduction and must be added back to the accounting income when calculating the taxable income. Therefore, businesses must assess the nature and purpose of their expenditures carefully to ensure they comply with tax laws and avoid the risk of claiming inappropriate deductions. 1. The principle of wholly and exclusively for business purposes. For an expenditure to be fully deductible, it must meet the key condition of being incurred wholly and exclusively for business purposes. This means that the expenditure must have been made entirely for the purpose of earning business income, and not for any personal or unrelated use. If the expenditure does not meet this criterion, it will not be considered deductible for corporate tax purposes. The business must clearly establish that the expense is necessary for the operation of its business and directly contributes to the production of income. If the expenditure serves a personal or non-business purpose such as personal health, family-related activities, or other non-business related activities, it must be excluded from the deductible expenses. In such cases, the expenditure is considered non-deductible, and it must be added back to the accounting income when calculating the taxable income. 2. Example 13. The importance of purpose in incurring expenditure. To illustrate the significance of purpose, let's look at the following example. Imagine an individual operating a sole establishment that manages an online sales platform. During the year, the individual incurs an expense of paying for dental work. However, this dental work is for personal use and not related to the operation of the online sales platform. Since the purpose of the dental expense was personal rather than business related, the expenditure would not be deductible for corporate tax purposes. In this case, the individual would need to add back the full amount of the dental expense to their accounting income when calculating taxable income, as the expense does not qualify as a legitimate business deduction. Furthermore, consider a situation where a company owns an online sales platform. If the company pays for the dental work of its owner or shareholder who does not actively participate in the day-to-day operations of the business, this payment would also be considered non-deductible. Again, the expense is for the personal benefit of the shareholder, not the business, and it cannot be treated as a legitimate business expense. In both cases, the business must assess whether the expense was incurred for business purposes and ensure that only expenses related to the operation of the business are deducted for tax purposes. 3. Apportionment of expenditure between business and non-business purposes. In some cases, an expenditure may serve both business and non-business purposes. In such cases, the amount of the expenditure that is incurred wholly and exclusively for business purposes can be deducted, but only the proportion related to the business use can be included as a deductible expense. The portion of the expenditure related to non-business purposes must be excluded from the deductible expenses. To determine how much of an expenditure is deductible, businesses need to apportion the expense between the business and non-business portions. The apportionment should be based on a fair and reasonable method, ensuring that it reflects the actual use of the expense for business purposes. The chosen apportionment method should be simple to apply, should accurately reflect the underlying activities of the business, and should be understandable to tax authorities. 4. Example 14. Apportionment of non-business expenditure. To better understand how apportionment works, let's look at a detailed example. Mr. A, a florist, owns a delivery van that is primarily used for collecting supplies and delivering goods to his customers. However, outside of regular business hours, Mr. A also uses the van for personal errands, such as shopping and driving his children to school. Over the course of the tax period, Mr. A records the mileage for both business and personal use of the van. The mileage records reveal that 60% of the van's use was for business purposes, while 40% was for personal use. At the end of the tax period, Mr. A's accounting income for the year is AED 4,500,000. The total expenses related to the van, including fuel, maintenance, and insurance, amount to AED 120,000. However, since the van was not used exclusively for business purposes, Mr. A cannot claim the full AED 120,000 as a deduction. Instead, he must apportion the vehicle expenses based on the proportion of business use. Given that 60% of the van's use was for business purposes, Mr. A can claim AED 72,000, 60% of AED 120,000, as a deductible business expense. The remaining 40% of the expenses, AED 48,000, must be added back to the accounting income to ensure that it is not deducted for tax purposes. As a result, when Mr. A calculates his taxable income, he will need to add back the AED 48,000 to his accounting income to account for the non-deductible portion of the vehicle expenses. Therefore, Mr. A's final taxable income for the tax period will be AED 4,548,000, AED 4,500,000 plus AED 48,000. 5. Fair and reasonable apportionment method. The apportionment of expenditures between business and non-business use should be based on a method that is fair and reasonable, reflecting the actual business and personal usage. In the example above, Mr. A's mileage records provide a clear and reasonable basis for apportioning the van's expenses. In practice, businesses may use other methods of apportionment that are equally fair, such as dividing the expenses by time or area used for business versus personal purposes. The key is that the method should be simple enough for the business to implement and for the tax authorities to verify, while ensuring that it accurately represents the business's actual usage of the expense. A method that is overly complex or burdensome would not be considered reasonable and could be challenged by tax authorities.